Goldman Sachs, one of the most influential investment banks in the world, is now planning a Bitcoin atomic bomb. No, this isn't clickbait, you heard that right, and it's not an exaggeration. This could be the petrodollar 2.0 moment and make the US central bank irrelevant. The US central bank is currently losing control. There are too few buyers for US government bonds. On the other hand, there is way too much debt. Goldman Sachs now wants to issue their own Bitcoin bonds, and that could completely shatter the money monopoly of the Federal Reserve and the United States. This could be the moment when central banks become obsolete, and I'm going to explain it to you in detail. What I'm saying might sound really exaggerated right now, but be careful, pay close attention. But first, go ahead and hit that like button for me. The Bitcoin atomic bomb is real, and yes, it sounds crazy, but smash that like button and I'll explain everything to you in detail right now. Also, subscribe if you haven't already. These videos still don't reach nearly enough people. The whole thing is being suppressed. You absolutely have to subscribe and like so we can really break through here. Bitbonds, meaning Bitcoin-backed government bonds, are going to completely change everything you know about bond markets, central banks, monetary policy, and much more. What might sound or look like just another trendy financial product is actually a nuclear weapon against the fiat system. Bitbonds are not just a gimmick. They are the vehicle through which Bitcoin is quietly taking control of the global bond market. And this is going to be huge, folks. And with that, over the entire global power structure. And this isn't happening in 2030, 2040, or 2050. It's happening right now. Spoiler alert, the new shadow central banks could be companies like 21 Capital, which, with this strategy, can accumulate significantly more Bitcoin than MicroStrategy. Jack Mallers' new company, which is collaborating with Tether and Cantor Fitzgerald, has already publicly announced that they want to accumulate more Bitcoin than MicroStrategy, but we'll get to that later. This is going to absolutely blow your mind. You can see it here as revealed by an X leak. It clearly states here that Goldman Sachs is currently reviewing whether to introduce Bitcoin bonds. The interest in Bitcoin products is extremely high, and this could be implemented as late as 2025 or early 2026. And this is pretty much the most bullish case that could possibly happen for Bitcoin. Bitcoin analyst Fred Krueger comments on this. The US built the first atomic bomb in Los Alamos in 1945, but the Russians got the bomb just 4 years later, in 1949. Today, 9 countries have them. In 2024, Saylor developed the first Bitcoin atomic bomb. In 2025, many more countries will become nuclear powers. And the atomic bomb that Michael Saylor has set off here is, just like the atomic bombs we have nowadays, a joke compared to what could still be coming because Bitbonds are a complete game changer here. And I've already told you this could be the vehicle that could even give Michael Saylor some real competition, because Michael Saylor is unrivaled with MicroStrategy with almost 500,000 Bitcoin. How are other companies, how are other, let's say, firms even supposed to catch up to that? But all of that is possible with this vehicle, because Bitbonds are the secret bridge here through which Bitcoin is quietly infiltrating the global financial system, with Wall Street, governments, and major investors on board. And the whole thing is happening without a revolution, without a big fuss. It's happening quietly and behind the scenes. And like I just told you, Goldman Sachs is now trying to launch Bitbonds here. So here we have an institution that wants to issue Bitcoin-backed bonds, not loans, but Bitcoin-backed bonds. And then we have the USA. And what's happening? The US currently has no more buyers in the US bond market. That means China is selling, Japan is selling, and so on. And now the US has to come up with ways to make US government bonds attractive again. And there have already been talks. There are also speculations and repeated hints that the US is also planning Bitbonds. So, to explain it, a Bitbond is a bond that is secured or backed by Bitcoin. That means when the bond is issued, when it goes out, on one side we have the first part, which is the US government bond. The second part is then a small portion of Bitcoin, which is added to each government bond when it is issued or purchased. And so, both the issuer and the recipient benefit from the fact that the whole thing is over-collateralized with Bitcoin, and there's also the potential to achieve excess returns here. So, a small example, normal US government bond yields or something like that, you can get a bond or something for around 4 or 5%. If you now create a Bitbond out of this, you can't issue this bond at 4.5%, but you can issue it at 6%, 10%, 5.5%, definitely at a higher interest rate. This will make the demand for these Bitbonds explode compared to the underlying government bonds. In other words, a Bitbond US government bond will always be more interesting and attractive than a traditional US government bond. And the big question you have to ask yourselves is whether this product will be issued by the US first. In that case, the Fed won't become obsolete, and the US will continue to be the hegemon here, or at least remain a relevant player. The second scenario raises the question of whether certain institutions might front-run the US. just like we're seeing now with Goldman Sachs. And of course, there are other candidates as well, like 21 Capital, which we'll get to in a moment, who are also being discussed as potential Bitbond issuers. And if that does end up being the case, then the issuance of U.S. Treasury bonds from the U.S. side will become irrelevant for now, because suddenly people won't be buying U.S. Treasuries directly from the U.S. anymore. Instead, they'll buy the Bitbonds, which are, of course, still paired with U.S. Treasuries from 21 Capital, from Goldman Sachs, or from other institutions, maybe even from a company like Strategy or MicroStrategy, if they decide to do something like that. And then the Fed loses control over the long end of the yield curve. For the Federal Reserve, for the U.S., it's obviously great, because this massively drives up demand for U.S. Treasuries, but now they no longer have any control. You can't do yield curve control here anymore, because you can't just easily steer the market like before. The leading players in controlling government bond yields are now these companies that offer much more attractive U.S. bonds in combination with Bitcoin, in the form of Bitbonds. That means if a company like 21 Capital, for example, offers 5% Bitcoin-backed loans in the form of Bitbonds, backed by U.S. government bonds, then people will probably choose those bonds instead of the 4.5% you get directly from the Federal Res. No, not from the Fed, but from the U.S., from the Treasury, from the Department of the Treasury. And then the companies will start outbidding each other. MicroStrategy will then offer Bitbonds at 5.5%, Goldman Sachs at 7%, and 21 Capital will come in with 10%. Wall Street will then merge here with U.S. government bonds, and U.S. government bonds will merge here with Bitcoin and the fiat system. Every loan will then, in effect, become a call option on Bitcoin. The CEOs and the CFOs, that is, the chief financial, officer, the finance bosses in these companies will become shadow Bitcoiners, shadow central banks, because they use Bitcoin as collateral. So, for example, the JP Morgans or maybe a Goldman Sachs or 21 Capital. These are the new shadow central banks. Fiat capital is converted into Bitcoin collateral, quietly, synthetically, structurally. So Bitcoin doesn't win loudly, but quietly and systematically. All of this pushes down interest rates. The Fed loses control over long-term interest rates. A new power player emerges in the bond market. It's no longer just the central banks. Right now, we have central banks that, for example, can do QE by government bonds and manipulate long-term interest rates that way. You could still do that, but the other companies, the Bitbond issuers, will probably, I'd say, not exactly manipulate, but very significantly change this yield curve. And then, of course, the power of the Fed will also be reduced here. But on the other hand, it's actually also in the Fed's interest because they'll hold back as well, and it's really in the interest of the US too. That means the US can continue to maintain its dominant position this way. And then, of course, stablecoins could also come into play. They could drive up the demand for US government bonds even further. But in my opinion, the demand generated by stablecoins compared to Bitbonds is laughable. If they actually managed to implement Bitbonds, it could generate way more demand than stablecoins ever could. And even the bullish Bitcoin cat says that this could change everything. Come here. So, what's the situation looking like? Bullish or bearish? Definitely very bullish vibes here. She says Bitbonds and Bitcoin are breaking out to Valhalla. Go ahead and drop a like for the bullish cat here. Let's fucking go. And now we're moving on to 21 Capital, Jack Mallor's company. He's the CEO here, and he said, quote, they want to hold more Bitcoin than MicroStrategy and be the leading player in the Bitcoin game. And David Bailey from Nakamoto made similar comments. They also want to have more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. He says it was a pretty good start with strategy, but now they're moving on to the next level. And then a lot of people asked, what exactly does that mean? And I'll explain to you now what that could mean. What if 21 Capital becomes the issuer of Bitbonds, meaning the issuer of US-backed government bonds that are bundled with Bitcoin? And now I'm going to take it a step further. Nakamoto even says they want to be involved in every relevant financial market worldwide. What if Nakamoto now comes along and not only bundles US government bonds with Bitcoin, but suddenly bundles Japanese government bonds with Bitcoin, suddenly bundles Chinese government bonds with Bitcoin, bundles all relevant government bonds worldwide with Bitcoin, and turns them into Bitbonds? 21 Capital is already being supported by big players like Kenton Fitzgerald, SoftBank, or Tether. So these are people who also have significant, connections to Wall Street and the traditional TradFi world. I've written it down here as well. This could, of course, mean a kind of petrodollar 2.0, a new monetary system that essentially merges Bitcoin and fiat. In that case, the system would be stabilized for now. We wouldn't see any hyperinflation or any kind of system collapse. A TradFi collapse would be prevented for the time being. She's just sticking her tail right in front of the camera. Are you hungry or thirsty? Or what's going on? And the US government could even support the whole thing because it would secure their control through regulatory capture. So this could be exactly what the US wants. Suddenly, they would have a Bitcoin ecosystem in the form of Bitcoin bonds. For example, large companies like 21 Capital, Strategy, Nakamoto, all holding 1 million or more Bitcoin, connected here with US Treasury bonds. This would increase demand for treasuries, but on the other hand, it would also mean that the US would have controllable Bitcoin in its hands. That means at any time, control would be ensured, so to speak. That means you have this uncontrollable money, but now it's in the hands of big companies. They, in turn, keep their funds with some kind of honeypots at Coinbase or wherever. Maybe the funds will become a bit more decentralized, but in any case, it means that suddenly Bitcoin is now within a regulated framework here in the US. That's in the interest of the US, but it's not really in Bitcoin's own interest. Of course, it pumps up the price, but it's also very, very dangerous for the Bitcoin network because now there's a big risk. Something a lot of people used to laugh about, like, oh, a gold confiscation campaign or something like that could never happen with Bitcoin, right? And that's always referred to as a 6102 attack. That means just like gold was simply taken away back then, because all the gold was stored with custodians at the time, they could just ban, freeze, and confiscate all the gold, or, as you might say, expropriate and ration it away. And if, of course, all the Bitcoin are now held by the big institutions, it would be just as easy to carry out a 6102 attack. That's why it's so important for you to take care of your own self-custody now, and to have your own hardware wallet ready. I'll put a link below to the TREZOR hardware wallet. Definitely check it out if you don't have a hardware wallet yet. Use the code BitcoinHotel, all lowercase, and you'll get a discount. That way, you can protect yourself from these scenarios because on one hand, we have the hyperbolic price case. That could, of course, send the Bitcoin price skyrocketing to the max. On the other hand, though, we now also have the so-called controllable Bitcoins, which could be confiscated at any time in a worst-case scenario. As long as you leave them on exchanges, as long as you hand them over to institutions, as long as you don't buy Bitcoin directly, but instead just buy some kind of securities from companies that issue Bitbonds, or you buy Bitbonds, but then you don't actually hold the Bitcoin yourself, the issuer does. And so, what we've ended up with is a kind of shadow central banking system that has huge potential, but on the other hand, also comes with huge risks. Yeah, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments below. I think it's absolutely crazy. The cat is already going totally wild, too. And if you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply using the code. What code do you need to enter? BitcoinHotel. What did he say? Enter the code BitcoinHotel, and you can save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin. Then you'll be well prepared here. Best to immediately transfer it to your hardware wallet, stash it away, cold storage, never touch it again, just hodl until the end. And if things go well, you'll be rich, and if things go badly, you'll all end up on the street. Peace out.